Zegler's remarks, layered with both personal pain and a quiet strength, served as a powerful reminder of how isolating the Hollywood machine can be, particularly for someone thrust into the spotlight before they've even had time to acclimate to adulthood. Her candidness peeled back the glittery facade of movie premieres and magazine covers, exposing the raw emotional cost that often hides behind the smile of a breakout star. She described the whirlwind of media obligations, red carpet appearances, and tightly managed press junkets not as thrilling milestones, but as emotionally draining experiences where she constantly felt like an interloper rather than a welcomed member of a creative family. There was an evident ache in her voice as she described sitting in crowded rooms, filled with laughter and lively conversation, while feeling internally silenced by an invisible barrier. Her story echoed that of many young artists who, despite working hard and earning their roles, still struggle to find belonging in a system that often favors image over intimacy. Her reflection on the cold professionalism she encountered suggested that the warmth and solidarity she had hoped for never truly materialized. Instead of the camaraderie often romanticized in behind-the-scenes footage, she faced a stark reality where everyone seemed more focused on their individual ascent than on building genuine connections. That kind of environment can be especially jarring for someone so young, navigating not only the professional pressures of performance, but also the emotional challenges of finding one's footing in a highly scrutinized space. For fans, especially, young Latinas who had finally seen themselves represented in a classic, culturally significant film, Zegler's openness was profoundly validating. Her vulnerability humanized the starlet persona, revealing the complexities that fame can bring, especially when one's cultural identity is wrapped into the narrative of their success. Yet, the lack of explicit details in her remarks left room for interpretation, and that void was quickly filled by speculation. The media and the public latched onto any perceived signs of discord, and Ariana DeBose, given her own visibility and success stemming from the same project, found herself unwillingly at the center of this narrative. DeBose's role in the film had been universally praised, and her historic Oscar win made her an icon in her own right. But with Zegler's comments in circulation, viewers started to retroactively dissect every shared moment between the two actresses. From interviews to award show interactions, social media timelines were flooded with clips slowed down and reanalyzed, facial expressions scrutinized, and every lukewarm response reinterpreted as evidence of a deeper rift. Then came DeBose's Instagram post, which, under normal circumstances, might have passed with little notice. But the choice of the Kermit meme, known for its passive-aggressive connotations, paired with a pointed caption about gratitude, hit differently in this context. It didn't take long before users began to tie it directly to Zegler's earlier remarks. To many, it read like a subtle but deliberate rebuke. The implication seemed to be that someone, likely Zegler, was ungrateful for the platform they'd been given, and was instead focusing on perceived slights. That interpretation struck a particularly sensitive chord, as the notion of gratitude is often weaponized in discussions about marginalized performers, suggesting they should accept their treatment without question simply because they've been given a chance. The backlash to DeBose's post came swiftly. Online spaces erupted into heated debates, with some accusing her of attempting to undermine Zegler's emotional truth. Critics argued that instead of offering empathy or even silence, DeBose had chosen to post something that felt dismissive at best and antagonistic at worst. Others were quick to defend her, asserting that the post may have had nothing to do with Zegler at all, and that DeBose had every right to express her own thoughts, especially in a digital landscape where everyone shares selectively. Some speculated that DeBose might have been responding to a completely unrelated situation, and that the meme had been misinterpreted in a media environment eager for conflict. Still, the timing, tone, and context made it difficult for many to see the post as purely coincidental. What emerged from the controversy was a larger, more complex dialogue about fame, representation, and emotional labor in the entertainment industry. Both women, though in different ways, became symbols of how success does not inoculate someone against isolation or judgment. Zegler's confession resonated because it pulled back the curtain on a universal human need to feel seen and supported, and DeBose's post, whether fair or not, became a focal point for the public's discomfort with how often that need goes unmet in an industry built on appearances. As DeBose's Instagram Live continued, the atmosphere of the broadcast remained intimate, with no flashy lighting or stylized background, just a raw, unvarnished glimpse into a woman attempting to reclaim her narrative amid a media storm. She acknowledged the online chatter and the assumptions that had circulated in recent days, expressing a blend of frustration and hurt over how quickly things had spiraled out of control. "It's wild," she said at one point, shaking her head. "You put something out there that you think is harmless, maybe even helpful to yourself in the moment, and suddenly you're cast as the villain in someone else's story." Her words carried the weight of someone who felt deeply misunderstood, not only by the general public, but perhaps even by those she had once considered allies. She didn't mention Zegler by name, but the subtext was unmistakable. There was a sense of careful calibration in her words, a balancing act between clearing the air and avoiding further escalation. DeBose reiterated that she had respect for everyone she worked with, and that the experience of making the film had been both a professional high and at times emotionally complex. She subtly acknowledged that dynamics on set aren't always perfect, especially when people are navigating high-pressure situations while still forming their identities. "We were all under a lot of stress," she said, "and sometimes that shows up in ways you don't realize until much later." The admission humanized her, presenting a version of DeBose who wasn't the composed, red-carpet-ready star, but a woman trying to do her best while learning in real time how to navigate fame's harsh spotlight. The comments on the live stream were a mixture of support, skepticism, and emotional confessionals from fans who saw themselves reflected in the situation. Some thanked DeBose for being transparent and giving them something real in a sea of curated celebrity content. Others still questioned the timing and motives behind the original post, unsure if her explanation fully addressed the hurt many had projected onto the situation. But regardless of where viewers landed, there was an undeniable shift in tone. By choosing to speak in her own words, from her own space, DeBose managed to reframe the narrative, not to erase what had been said, but to remind people that real humans exist beyond headlines and clickbait. Her broadcast opened the door to a broader dialogue about how public figures, particularly women of color, are dissected and judged not just for what they say, but for what people assume they mean. The same fans who had once uplifted DeBose for her activism and achievements had in some cases been quick to turn on her when a single post didn't align with their expectations. That volatility, DeBose implied, was part of a larger issue. "We talk a lot about giving people grace," she said, "but sometimes it feels like we forget to practice it, especially online." It was a quiet plea for empathy in an environment that too often thrives on outrage. In the days that followed her livestream, the noise began to die down, though not entirely. The controversy had left its mark, but it had also laid bare the impossibly high standards placed on celebrities, especially those who are expected to simultaneously represent and transcend their communities. For DeBose, it was a moment of reckoning. Reminder that even with all the accolades and applause, she was still vulnerable to the same misunderstandings, the same emotional missteps as anyone else. And for Zegler, the fallout served to underscore the profound impact of sharing one's truth and the ripple effects that can follow even the most carefully chosen words. In the aftermath of Ariana DeBose's Instagram Live, the conversation surrounding her dynamic with Rachel Zegler gradually transitioned from reactive outcry to more introspective analysis. The immediacy of social media had initially amplified the perceived conflict, but as the dust began to settle, commentators, fans, and industry insiders alike began to unpack the deeper themes that the incident had unearthed. Rather than simply dismissing the issue as a misunderstanding, many took the opportunity to engage in broader conversations about the immense pressure placed on young women in Hollywood, especially those who carry the added weight of representation for communities that have historically been excluded from the spotlight. DeBose's candid demeanor during the livestream was dissected frame by frame, her choice of words praised by some for their vulnerability and criticized by others as too carefully calculated to be entirely genuine. Yet, the one consensus that emerged was that her decision to speak directly, rather than through a carefully drafted PR statement, marked a significant departure from how celebrity controversies are traditionally handled. For many fans, DeBose's decision to highlight her past moments of connection with Zegler, rather than deflecting blame or downplaying the situation, was an important gesture. Referencing their shared experience filming West Side Story added a sense of sincerity and groundedness to her words. In doing so, she subtly reminded viewers that whatever tension the public had inferred might not accurately reflect the reality between the two actresses. Her acknowledgement of the pressures faced by young stars struck a chord with audiences, particularly those attuned to the unique scrutiny faced by women of color navigating Hollywood. She recognized, without diminishing Zegler's feelings or experiences, that the environment can often be emotionally taxing, and that even well-meaning intentions can be misinterpreted or magnified in damaging ways. Despite these efforts, public opinion remained divided. While some applauded DeBose for modeling accountability in a way that felt human and unfiltered, others argued that her live session was more performative than reparative. They pointed to the continued ambiguity surrounding her original meme. Post and questioned whether she had fully grappled with the unintended implications of sharing it amid Zegler's vulnerable moment. To these critics, the live stream was not quite an apology, but rather a public relations maneuver designed to reassert control over a narrative that had already spiraled beyond her grasp. This duality, between perception and intent, became a focal point of online debates, reinforcing how modern celebrity operates under constant surveillance, where even the subtlest actions are assigned immense meaning. Media analysts joined the discourse, examining how the entertainment press had played a role in inflaming the situation. Headlines often presented DeBose's meme as an overt attack, framing the incident as a feud rather than a miscommunication. The click-driven incentive to dramatize interactions between high-profile women, especially those in the same project or industry, was criticized for its reductive impact. Several op-eds highlighted the danger of placing women, particularly women of color, into artificial binaries: supportive ally or silent rival, humble breakthrough star or entitled newcomer. DeBose herself had hinted at this phenomenon during her livestream, pushing back against the narrative machine that churns nuanced interactions into easily digestible drama for mass consumption. Her plea for empathy, though modest in tone, resonated with those who have grown weary of the internet's tendency to villainize public figures based on half-truths and out-of-context fragments. As the weeks passed, the intensity of the conversation faded, but the incident remained a reference point in ongoing discussions about celebrity accountability, digital misinterpretation, and the emotional toll of constant visibility. For both DeBose and Zegler, it became a reminder that their every move is under a microscope, and that navigating fame today means not only performing for the camera, but also performing constant self-explanation to an audience always watching, always judging. Whether the controversy ultimately drew them closer or pushed them further apart remains unknown, but it undeniably left an imprint on how fans and the media alike engage with the stories of rising stars. The renewed spotlight on the West Side Story cast not only reignited interest in the film's legacy, but also opened a window into the behind-the-scenes complexities that often go unspoken during a film's promotional run. Steven Spielberg's 2021 remake was, by all technical and artistic accounts, a critical success. Reviewers lauded the reimagined visuals, choreography, and standout performances, particularly those of Ariana DeBose and Rachel Zegler, whose portrayals brought fresh dimension to beloved characters. Yet, despite glowing reviews, the film's trajectory was muddied by external circumstances that no amount of talent or prestige could completely overcome. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed the film's release, undercutting its momentum and forcing it to compete in a marketplace that had become unpredictable and fragmented. The presence of Ansel Elgort, whose casting drew backlash due to prior allegations, created further discomfort for some audiences and cast a shadow over the film's otherwise progressive aspirations. As a result, the film's box office performance was disappointing relative to expectations, which added a layer of frustration to what was meant to be a triumphant moment for its rising stars. For DeBose and Zegler, the entire process was a crash course in navigating Hollywood stardom under a microscope. Suddenly thrust into the awards circuit, they were not only representing a major studio project, but also becoming symbols of a more inclusive industry. Their visibility, while groundbreaking, came with a burden: the pressure to be perfect ambassadors, to smile through exhaustion, and to maintain unity in the face of personal challenges or complicated interpersonal dynamics. DeBose's historic Oscar win was a breakthrough moment that resonated with many communities, particularly queer and Afro-Latina audiences, who saw in her success a long-overdue recognition. But with such milestones often comes unintended comparison. Zegler, who had carried the film's emotional core as Maria, was noticeably absent from the Oscars that year, a fact that sparked its own round of controversy and fed the growing narrative that she was not being given her due. This disparity, whether real or perceived, laid the groundwork for fans and media to begin crafting their own storylines about competition, favoritism, and neglect. In this atmosphere, DeBose's seemingly simple meme post became more than just a fleeting thought. It was a cultural Rorschach test onto which people projected their beliefs about fairness, success, and support among women in entertainment. The absence of a direct response from Zegler only added fuel to the fire. Her silence was scrutinized just as much as DeBose's words had been. To some, it signaled strength and professionalism, a quiet refusal to engage in unnecessary drama. To others, it hinted at deeper discontent or a rift too complicated to air publicly. As social media users pored over every detail, even innocuous posts from either actress began to be interpreted through the lens of the rumored feud. What became increasingly evident was that modern fame demands an impossible balance. Public figures are expected to share their lives openly, to be emotionally transparent and digitally available, while still managing the expectation of poise, diplomacy, and media-savvy messaging. The lines between personal and public life have eroded almost entirely, leaving celebrities vulnerable to having even their most trivial actions taken out of context and turned into defining moments. For young stars like Zegler and DeBose, whose careers are still being shaped, the stakes of every online interaction are magnified. They're not just actors, they're representatives of progress, symbols of change, and cultural icons to legions of fans who expect them to be flawless in how they handle fame, representation, and even conflict. The meme that sparked the discourse may have been posted in a moment of personal vulnerability, a way for DeBose to express something entirely unrelated to her West Side Story co-stars. But in today's interconnected world, context often matters less than perception. Once the post was seen through a specific lens, it ceased to belong solely to DeBose's personal experience. It became part of a much broader, more volatile narrative, one that speaks to the emotional toll of public life and the often unrealistic expectations placed on those who dare to speak, remain silent, or simply exist in the spotlight. The controversy surrounding Ariana DeBose and Rachel Zegler ultimately served as a prism through which larger issues within the entertainment industry and society at large were refracted. While the immediate focus was on a social media post and the ensuing speculation, the deeper narrative exposed entrenched dynamics that shape the way women, especially women of color, are perceived, evaluated, and compared in public discourse. The eagerness with which some corners of the internet latched onto the idea of a feud reflected more than just idle curiosity. It demonstrated a cultural tendency to reduce women to simplistic archetypes of competition and envy. Despite an abundance of evidence to the contrary, interviews, public support, and shared accolades, the narrative of rivalry was far more clickable, far more digestible than one of mutual respect or parallel success. That preference speaks volumes about the stories society prefers to tell about women, and the limitations it places on how they're allowed to exist in public. The notion that there is limited space for women to shine simultaneously is a byproduct of long-standing systemic inequities. In an industry that has historically sidelined or tokenized women of color, any rise to prominence is often viewed through the lens of scarcity. There's an implicit suggestion that if one woman ascends, it comes at the expense of another, a zero-sum game that fuels public fixation on interpersonal dynamics instead of collective progress. This mindset is rarely applied to male actors who share similar trajectories. When multiple men rise to stardom within the same genre or franchise, they're seen as part of a movement or trend. But when it comes to women, especially those who defy conventional norms, the success of one can be framed as a threat to the other. This disparity in perception has consequences that extend beyond gossip columns. It shapes the careers of those involved, influencing casting decisions, brand endorsements, and public narratives that stick long after the moment of controversy has passed. For DeBose and Zegler, both of whom have become symbolic figures in the movement toward greater inclusivity in film, the stakes are even higher. They're not only expected to deliver standout performances, but also to serve as cultural ambassadors, role models, and paragons of virtue and unity, all while being subjected to microscopic analysis. That level of pressure is unsustainable, and incidents like this one reveal just how fragile the line is between admiration and condemnation. In the wake of the drama, public sentiment began to mature. The initial rush to judgment gave way to more thoughtful conversations about media literacy, bias, and the toxic allure of celebrity scandal. Commentators, fans, and even fellow actors began questioning why so much energy had been devoted to dissecting a moment that may have had no underlying conflict to begin with. DeBose's live stream, with its candidness and emotional clarity, encouraged viewers to consider the human being behind the headlines. Zegler's silence, too, began to be reinterpreted, not as aloofness or passive aggression, but as a deliberate boundary set in an age that rarely respects them. Their handling of the situation served as a subtle but powerful rebuke to the mechanisms that sought to pit them against each other. By refusing to escalate the drama, and instead responding with either vulnerability or silence, both women modeled a different kind of strength, one that resists spectacle and prioritizes personal dignity. Their responses reminded audiences that not every moment of ambiguity demands a public reckoning, and not every perceived slight is a scandal in waiting. As the noise around the story faded, what remained was a lesson in the perils of assumption, the hunger for conflict, and the need for a more compassionate, nuanced way of engaging with the people behind the personas. The final chapter of the Ariana DeBose and Rachel Zegler episode, while no longer dominating headlines, remains etched into the broader conversation about fame and digital discourse. As both actresses resumed their careers, they reminded the public that their artistry, dedication, and individuality far outweigh any fleeting controversy. Yet the residual conversation from that moment continues to resonate, revealing a troubling truth about the culture we've created, a culture that thrives on immediacy, thrives on speculation, and often resists the patience required to understand context. The social media landscape, while offering unprecedented access to stars, also encourages a kind of voyeurism that transforms celebrities into characters in an endless, unscripted drama. Every online post becomes potential fodder for debate, and every ambiguity is swiftly filled in with whatever narrative best satisfies the public's thirst for emotional highs and lows. In DeBose's case, her Instagram story, meant perhaps as a personal reflection or even a moment of introspection, was seized upon and molded into something she never intended. That phenomenon reflects a disturbing shift in public behavior, the presumption that we are owed clarity, confession, or commentary from those in the spotlight at all times. There is little room for missteps, let alone silence. What followed was not merely a misunderstanding between two actresses, but a collective projection of unresolved cultural anxieties about success, representation, and authenticity onto the figures of DeBose and Zegler. The frenzy that followed was less about them as individuals and more about what they symbolized to different factions of the audience. One post sparked a debate that had far more to do with our societal lens than it did with the reality of their relationship. Zegler's silence, while critiqued by some, ultimately stood as an act of autonomy. She chose not to validate or indulge a narrative she hadn't authored, and in doing so, asserted control in an environment that so often strips celebrities of it. Her refusal to respond wasn't passive. It was an active decision to remain grounded, focused, and perhaps to shield herself from further intrusion. Meanwhile, DeBose's measured decision to go live, address the speculation, and speak with sincerity offered a rare moment of transparency in a space typically dominated by curated statements. Her vulnerability, broadcast in real time, reminded viewers that public figures are people first, complex, imperfect, and navigating the same emotional terrain as anyone else. This incident did not end careers, nor did it irreparably damage reputations. Instead, it illuminated the fine line celebrities must walk in an era where perception often trumps intention, and where their every move is dissected in the court of public opinion. More crucially, it asked the audience to confront its own role in perpetuating the cycles of judgment and overreaction. DeBose's and Zegler's choices, distinct yet equally valid, provided a roadmap for how to navigate the storm without losing oneself to it. They demonstrated that grace, authenticity, and silence all have a place in a world obsessed with noise. And in doing so, they offered not just a conclusion to a momentary scandal, but a lesson in how to move forward with dignity, both for celebrities and for those who watch them.